Welcome back to Quick Book Summary. What is the secret to a happy and fulfilled life? Is it getting everything you want? Is it having wonderful relationships with other people? No. A happy life is accepting yourself, flaws and all. This book will provide you concrete and easy ways to do this. Being happy is within reach, according to Alfred Adler and his Adlerian psychology. Let's talk about the author. Ichiro Kishimi is a firm believer of Adlerian psychology. He provides counseling for youths. He is a counselor and consultant for the Japanese Society of Adlerian Psychology. Fumite Koga is an award-winning author. Introduction. The world is simple. Anyone can be happy. The guaranteed way of being miserable is living up to other people's expectations. Do you agree with the last statement? Is life really that simple to navigate? Alfred Adler, the renowned psychologist, strongly believes that achieving happiness is truly easy. Here are some beliefs that he established. Happiness involves denying your past. The reason why you are unhappy is because of the other people around you. For you to be happy, you have to prioritize yourself. You might disagree with his teachings. A lot of people do. But one thing is for sure, majority who live by Adler's teachings were able to achieve true happiness. Watch this video to know if it is true for you too. Lesson 1. Deny trauma. In a small town in the countryside, there lived a youth. He was in his early 20s. Just like people his age, he was curious about a lot of things. At the edge of their town, there lived a philosopher. This philosopher was known for his endless wisdom. But his most famous teaching is that he firmly believes that the world is simple. Now, the youth was absolutely surprised by this statement. How could the world be simple, when in fact, it was full of complexities? How are illegal drugs, war, famine, and political conflict simple? Was the philosopher out of his mind? There were also other beliefs declared by the philosopher that seemed wrong to the youth. So, the youth visited the philosopher and challenged his beliefs. The philosopher welcomed the young warmly. The philosopher was impressed at how strongly the youth disagreed with him. The philosopher invited the youth into his home and began to talk to him. The philosopher said that his belief is strongly rooted in Alfred Adler's theories. Alfred Adler was a psychologist who greatly emphasized the power of individual psychology. To put simply, individual psychology is recognizing what helps the person to achieve the best overall well-being. The youth was a bit confused about what individual psychology meant. However, as he asked more questions, he came to understand. First, the youth challenged the philosopher's view on change. Was the philosopher serious in saying that he believes people can change? The youth himself wanted to change. He believes that he is inferior. He had insecurities such as not being smart enough or good enough. But he could not change these things about him. He had these insecurities because he was bullied by his parents. He was also bullied by his friends. The bullying in the past was the cause, and his insecurities in the present were the effect. The philosopher said yes. People can change. The past does not matter anymore because it is in the past. The youth challenged this opinion as well. If the past did not matter, did the philosopher also think that trauma does not exist? The philosopher firmly said that he does not believe in trauma. This is also the opinion of Alfred Adler. Another famous psychologist is Sigmund Freud. Trauma is often mentioned in his theories. Freud thought that a person's trauma causes his present unhappiness. But Adler thought this was wrong. Adler said that a person's experiences do not make him succeed or fail. Instead, it is what you do with your experiences that determines your success or failure. In other words, it does not matter what happened to you. What matters is the meaning or purpose you give to these experiences. You can take control of your life. You decide how your life should be lived. Lesson 2. All problems are interpersonal problems. The youth was still not convinced about the philosopher's beliefs. He decided to ask more questions about people and change. People can change, but what specifically stops them from changing? What if the youth decides not to let his past define him? Yet, he still has a hard time changing things about himself that he does not like. The philosopher answered that the youth had a goal. His goal was to dislike himself. The youth was shocked. He had no such goal about himself. What kind of goal was that? The philosopher smiled and walked him through it. The philosopher asked the youth what things he did not like about himself. The youth answered him. He had lots of shortcomings. He was pessimistic because every time he tried something, he failed. He did not trust other people. The youth was aware that he was not attractive in terms of physical features and personality. The philosopher listened intently to the youth. Then the philosopher validated what the youth felt. Never mind the fact that it was not backed up by facts. In other words, the youth's self-confidence was extremely low. The philosopher asked more questions. Why does the youth view himself this way? The youth answered that it was just the way he is. He had no strong points. He was weak. But the philosopher said he was wrong. The youth made it his goal not to like himself. It was a way for the youth to keep people out. If he did not like himself, then who would? The philosopher pointed out that the youth only focused on his weaknesses. Therefore, it reinforced his dislike towards himself. The youth thought like this because he was afraid of being rejected by other people. The rejection would hurt him deeply. That is why the youth rejected himself ahead. The youth isolated himself. He believes that if he did not reach out to people, he would not get hurt. Being accepted and loved was something he wanted, of course. But he had already made it his goal not to take that risk. If there was a chance he would be accepted, there would be a bigger chance that he would get rejected. The philosopher pointed out that it is impossible not to get hurt in your relationships with other people. If you do not want to get hurt, then you should just be isolated all your life. But, again, this is impossible. You cannot be alone all your life. In Adlerian psychology, every problem you have is an interpersonal problem. This means that other people are involved in every problem you have. If you were alone in the world, you would have no problem. The youth thought this concept was ridiculous. The problems you have with yourself, your internal problems, are they actually interpersonal problems? The philosopher made himself as an example. Back then, he was extremely insecure about his height. He was short, and people always pointed it out. The philosopher felt inferior because of this. But just like any other insecurity you have, your feeling of inferiority is because of the value you give to it. In other words, your feelings of inferiority are due to the subjective feelings you have. And where does this come from? It is from comparing yourself to other people. If the philosopher was not aware of other people and their height, he would not feel bad that he was short. Your subjective feelings can either make things good or bad for you. The philosopher's subjective feelings about his height made him feel bad. But a friend pointed out that his shortness makes him less intimidating. Of course, this was the friend's subjective feeling. But the philosopher felt good about it. Subjectivity has one advantage: it is up to you on how you deal with it. You always have the choice to feel bad or feel good about what you see as inferiorities. Furthermore, you can stop seeing your inferiorities as such because it is a subjective matter. What you feel is entirely up to you. Lesson 3. Discard other people's tasks. Aside from feelings of inferiority, there is another problem that comes with interpersonal problems. It also robs you of your freedom. One way of resolving the interpersonal problem was to see people as your comrade instead of an enemy. It certainly reduced the youth's feeling of inferiority when he thought of it this way. The potential of having a friend made him less scared to make bonds. However, the youth pointed out an exception to this solution. His parents fulfilled their role of taking care of him. They raised and protected him. His parents always compared him to people his age. They criticized whatever the youth did. Why could he not accomplish the things other people his age have accomplished? The youth identified his parents as one of the major sources why he had low self-esteem. All his life, the youth tried to impress his parents even though it was not what he liked. They did not like the course he took up in college. So, he compromised by going to the university his parents liked. It was a complicated feeling. The youth was not mad, but he was not happy either. You are most likely relating to the youth right now. Even though you dislike your parents, you still want to impress them. You still want to be recognized by them. It is no surprise that Adlerian psychology disapproves of this kind of recognition. The The philosopher agrees that praise or recognition from others makes a person happy. He asked the youth why exactly he seeks for it. It was simple, according to the youth. Recognition makes you feel like you have value. It can get rid of the inferior feelings. But Alfred Adler saw this as problematic. Society has sadly taken on the reward and punishment education. If you do something good, you receive praise. If you do something bad, you get a punishment. This mentality can be bad. If you do something good, but no one recognizes it, the tendency is you stop doing it. The same thing can be said on the side of punishment. If no one is going to punish you, you will keep doing the bad thing. The philosopher said that a person should not live for other people's expectations. The youth argued that that is a selfish way to live. Should a person only think about himself? The philosopher told the youth about a teaching of Judaism. If you keep living to satisfy the expectations of other people, then you are living because of them. If you are living for them, who is going to live life for you? You have a life that is meant for your expectations about yourself only. You spend all your life trying to satisfy the expectations of other people. But it will only make you unhappy in the end. Thinking about yourself is not being selfish. In fact, there is a concept in Adlerian psychology called separation of tasks. It is acting on your own will but also considering other people. Suppose there is a child that does not like to study. He does not do his homework, and he does not listen to the teacher. Of course, a parent would probably intervene at this point. But in Adlerian psychology, they have a different approach. Whose task is it for the child to do good at school? Is it the child's or his parents'? The philosopher answered that it was the child's task. If the child's parents told him to study, then there is no separation of tasks. An argument would occur. So, Adler's separation of tasks is simply not intruding on other people's tasks. There is also another way to know if it is your task or other people's. If the task is done, who will ultimately receive the results of the completed task? In the example above, it is the child who receives the results. If he does poorly in class, he will be held back. If the parents get involved in this task, the problems of interpersonal relationships will arise. The child will feel inferior. He will also strive to live up to his parents' expectations. The youth thought this was ridiculous. The parents knew what the child had to do. As his guardians, the parents have a responsibility to guide him. No child would want to study as a hobby anyway. But the philosopher had an answer to that. Parents would say that forcing their child to study is for the child's own good. But parents also have their own goals to fulfill. The parents would not like society to think they have neglected their child. Or they might perhaps want their child to be a trophy they can boast about. At this, the youth was even more surprised. So, the parents should just let their children be. They should not care about their child's education. The philosopher told the youth to pay attention. What they were talking about is the separation of tasks. The parents meddling with what clearly is the child's task should be avoided. However, this does not mean they cannot help him. To avoid meddling in the task, the parents can tell the child that it is his task to study. If he decides to study, then the parents will assist him. They will not intrude on their child's task. This is similar to how Adlerian psychology's approach on counseling. Adlerian psychology does not see the task of changing the client's life as their task. It is solely up to the client to change herself. The counselor will only provide sufficient assistance. You cannot force people to change if they do not want to. Lesson 4. Where the center of the world is. The philosopher was curious about what the youth said. The youth was quick to point out how selfish most of the concepts in Adlerian psychology were. So, the philosopher asked the youth what his definition of a self-centered person is. It was no surprise that the youth described a self-centered person negatively. The youth thought that a self-centered person was a tyrant. He would only think about what would benefit him. He would not care if he got something through horrible ways. Then, the philosopher pointed out that extremely self-centered people also have a hard time with the separation of tasks. Not only that, they also desire for recognition. Even the youth was considered a self-centered person. Even though he was careful of what other people thought of him, it all goes back to his own views. The youth was just worried about how other people thought of him. What they said about him, what their reactions to his actions would be. It would all go back to him. Do you know what is a sign that you are not chasing for recognition? It is when there are people who dislike you. You are not fulfilling the expectations they have of you. Hence, they do not like you. This is when you are truly free. To experience this freedom, you have to remember this: you are not the center of the world. You will think that you are the protagonist of life. There are times when you strongly feel it. But remember your place. You are just a member of a community. You are part of a whole. People do not live to do something for you. You have learned to ignore people's expectations of you. But you must also learn not to set expectations of other people. What happens if you set expectations? You become a prisoner of your illusions. You will feel like people have insulted you even though they have not. You are not the center of the world. Assuming that you are will make you self-centered. You will look at a person and ask, what will this person give to me? That is incredibly selfish. Instead, when you meet a person, ask yourself, what can I give to this person? It is through this kind of thinking that you greatly contribute to your community. For Adlerian psychology, a sense of belongingness to community can give one refuge. When you hear the word community, you will think of your neighborhood. To some extent, you might think of society as a whole. This is how the youth defined community. But the philosopher was quick to correct him. Yes, community can be society. But there is also a sense of belongingness, of community, in your job. There is also a sense of community in your school or in your household. Adlerian psychology identifies these places as community because you feel like you belong there. The problem with people is that they make one community their main focus. They become so consumed with it that they cannot imagine themselves without it. This is a problem, according to the philosopher. Suppose the youth considered school as his absolute community. His self-worth is connected to his grades, his standing in class, and his reputation at school. When you tie yourself to just one community, one bad instance can greatly affect you. Suppose the youth had low marks. He would think he is nothing if he had low grades. Obviously, this is a bad mentality to have. The philosopher said that it is nice to remember that there are endless communities to be a part of. Being a part of one community, such as school, does not define you. Being a part of larger communities, such as the workforce, will also give you perspective. It will make you realize how small your troubles were when you were in a small community, such as school. Now it's time for conclusion. First, you learn that being truly happy is to have the courage to be disliked. This mindset is discussed thoroughly in Adlerian psychology. Adlerian psychology was founded by Alfred Adler. Second, you learn that people can change and that the past does not define you. What is in the past, is in the past. In Adlerian psychology, there is no such thing as trauma. Your past experiences do not define the current you. What truly defines you is how you deal with these experiences. If you want to be happy, focus on the present. Third, you learn that every problem you have is because of interpersonal relationships. You think you are not good enough because you keep comparing yourself with other people. You feel inferior because you think people are better than you. You feel inferior because you only focus on your weaknesses. You think you have no value just because you have weaknesses. Third, you learn that another way to be happy is to let go of recognition. Yes, it feels satisfying to get praised. But it is a terrible motivator to do good things. Some people will only do good things if they get praised for it. You should live life on your own terms. Satisfy the expectations you have set for yourself. If you keep fulfilling other people's expectations, you will never be happy. Fourth, you learn that satisfying one's own expectations is not selfish. It is just clearly establishing what is your task. The separation of tasks in Adlerian psychology avoids interpersonal conflict. If you take another person's task, you are living to fulfill that person's expectations. Fifth, you learn that belonging to communities helps you avoid being self-centered. There is always a chance that you will feel entitled and too proud. Belonging to small and large communities helps you avoid that. A sense of community humbles you. You are a part of something bigger. Thus, you strive to be better. It is easy to find pleasure these days. You can buy lots of sweets or have many lovers. But it is rare, almost impossible, to find genuine happiness. Do not be afraid to make yourself happy because who else will do it for you? Thank you for watching this video. Do not forget to like, share and subscribe to our YouTube channel.